The science of chiropractic is based upon neurology. Hi, I'm Dr. Krista Burns from the American Posture Institute, and today we're talking about the neurology of the adjustment. So the power of the adjustment, the chiropractic adjustment is so powerful in terms of stimulation to the brain. So there's different types of sensory stimulation, including an adjustment, a movement such as an exercise, and a stimulation such as a massage, deep tissue or light tissue massage. Now, what's interesting about the adjustment is that the adjustment brings the joint into the paraphysiologic space that otherwise cannot be obtained. So the power of the adjustment is going to be that much more powerful in comparison to active movement and in comparison to passive stimulation. Now, when we do an adjustment, what's actually happening? Where is this perceived and understood in the brain? So it's important to understand the sensory cortex is what interprets any change of joint position. So any change of proprioception or joint position then is understood by the sensory cortex. Now, the sensory cortex is located right here in the parietal lobe. So in the frontal lobe, we have the motor cortex for motor output. In the sensory cortex, we have the sensory homunculus or the sensory cortex to perceive and understand our world. So every movement that we do, every adjustment that we receive, every sensation that we pick up is all perceived within the sensory cortex. So that's where that stimulation or that information is being sent. Now, in addition to that, we have what's called sensory motor integration. So we know that within the spinal column, within the spinal cord, we have ascending and descending pathways. Now, some of the ascending pathways that are stimulated with that adjustment are going to be the spinal reticular pathway and the spinal cerebellar pathway. So what exactly does that mean? The spinal reticular pathway is going to be between the spine and the pontomedullary reticular formation, which is in the brainstem. So spinal reticular. So it goes from the spine up to the PMRF, the pontomedullary reticular formation. What's so cool about that is that it stimulates the inhibition of flexion. So when our patients have flexor dominant posture, they're in this position here with shoulder anteriority and that postural hyperkyphosis or a C-shaped spine. So when we stimulate that pathway, it's going to stimulate the part of the brainstem which actually controls extension and inhibition of flexion. So if this is flexor dominant, which is a poor postural design, then when we stimulate that pathway, when we go into an upright extended position, which is going to be much healthier for our patients. And then of course the spinocerebellar pathway. So if we think about that name, spine to cerebellum. So the cerebellum is located right here next to the brainstem. Now, the cerebellum is in charge of refining fine motor output and postural stabilization or postural adjustments. So it makes those quick adjustments to your posture so that you don't fall over. And it refines motor output. So it works together with the motor cortex here in the frontal lobe to refine your motor outputs. So instead of doing a gross motor output, you have very fine intentional movements. That's going to be due to stimulation of the cerebellum. So we're talking about sensory motor integration when we're talking about adjustments. And what's so interesting too is this is an evidence-based approach. So if you think about flexor dominant posture, again, I told you that this is flexor dominant and this is inhibition of flexion, meaning that I'm extended upright postural design. So with flexor dominant posture then, this is what the research is telling us, that patients with postural hyperkyphosis have a 1.14-fold increase in early mortality. Men who experience height loss associated with a postural hyperkyphosis, that C-shaped spinal curvature, are 64% more likely to die of a heart attack, 64%. And flexor dominant posture is now considered a diagnostic factor of depression associated with less productivity, poor mood, and a lower sense of self. And patients with postural hyperkyphosis or flexor dominant posture are also more inclined to suffer from asthma and have restriction of their respiratory pathways. So recognize that when you're doing an adjustment of the thoracic spine, for example, to correct flexor dominant posture, you're stimulating the brain, the neurology that controls the posture system. And that's going to be an evidence-based approach because we know that in the literature, it's demonstrating there's so many ill health effects associated with flexor dominance. So we want to correct that and just recognize that patients need you. They need and want what you do. The power of that adjustment is so great. It's so grand. It's so powerful. It's such a great stimulation to the central nervous system. So with that chiropractic adjustment, you can change a lot of lives in your chiropractic practice.